Hello and welcome back to Cube Coverage. This week we've got Felix drafting Ben's Unsleeved Pauper Cube. Pack so far, looking pretty decent. Moment of Craving is a pretty good removal spell. Forbidden Alchemy, slow but quite effective card advantage spell. Looks like he's got some good options to choose from. We've seen Felix on camera winning quite a lot, so I'm excited to see his draft process. And the Unsleeved cube is a very seasoned cube, very well understood by the older members of the group, so the power level of it is very flat. Ben has been quite aggressively balancing it, so there's a lot of advantage to be gained by understanding how to combine the cards, set up synergies, find ways to exploit the texture of the format. Generals of Corruption is a tricky card. It counts swamps, but the rate on it is high enough that you can often play it in a 2-color deck. But looks like Felix is enticed by the Forbidden Alchemy. So, a great card for hitting your 4th land drop or setting up some kind of mid-range play to keep you alive, and then the flashback matters quite a lot in a long game, but there's also a lot of times when by the time you can flash it back, the self-mill is a genuine concern. But if you've got the time and mana for Forbidden Alchemy, it sets up quite a lot of stuff, and this is a cube where I think you've got a decent amount of time. The format can be a bit of a morass. Things can really get bogged down and slowed down, so he is picking up the Forbidden Alchemy. Nice pickup there. I think some consideration for Courage in Crisis on the back of a +1/+1 counters theme in the cube. I think something that you've got an angle with Courage in Crisis where you're just trying to maximize the number of +1 counters for efficiency's sake. I think the other angle with a +1 counter deck is focusing on getting it on flyers and other keyworded creatures to maximize the impact of each individual +1 counter. But yeah, Forbidden Alchemy, a card I'm happy to play in any blue deck. The black cost of the flashback is quite easy to meet, as the alchemy can often draw you into a black source, and there's a lot of times when you don't need to flash it back in any hurry, or the flashback is just not relevant unless things are really unless you're really flooding out. So I could definitely see alchemy coming up in a blue-white deck or a blue-red deck. More likely to be in a more controlling blue-white deck. So the Shambler has got some utility with the alchemy, because you can put it in your graveyard and then get a 2-for-1 that way. First Day of Class is a real weirdo card, so it plays quite well with the mascot lessons, that is the lesson spells that make a creature. The red one especially, there's a lot of situations where you're happy to pay 2 extra mana to give it a +1 counter in haste. And also looking at Dimir Guildgate, so that is, he already knows that's going to be relevant fixing. He's looking to play blue and at least splash black. And there's a SWAT in this pack, but you don't have to prioritize interaction too highly in this cube. There's a lot of creatures that are good against it, and not a lot of bomb creatures that really run away with the game. Especially at low power, it's quite rare to see a creature with low power and a important ability. Otherwise, there's a foil at the back of the pack for if he wants to capitalize on the instant speed nature of Forbidden Alchemy. Play a bit of a draw-go control game. And First Day of Class also has a bit of utility for if he's playing black with the Persist creature, then First Day of Class means that your Persist creatures, it cancels out the -1 counter. So you can sacrifice the same creature an infinite number of times in one turn. There is a possibility to set up an infinite combo there. I haven't seen it actually happen in action. But the Guild Gate is very appealing here. You want to pick up, if you know that you can use a land, you want to pick it up early. As dual lands are kind of like gold cards in that it's quite hard to pick them up early, and later on when people have cemented their colors, then they're going to be picking them really highly. Otherwise, Enoch Wayfarer is quite a good card. It's got a lot of mechanical overlap with Forbidden Alchemy because it mills you. And Borderland Explorer, a card I'm quite curious to see in action. In theory, you can build a deck where you discarding a card is giving you more utility than your opponent, so you can use it to set up, again, some kind of graveyard thing, which Felix is already pointing his deck a little bit towards, and it provides a bit of color fixing as well. And Corrupt is another weird card if he wants to go in on building around it, but he's pulling the Omen Speaker to the front, so this is pointing towards a very slow defensive controlling strategy. Out of Air, also an instant that plays well with Forbidden Alchemy. And Sidraxis Alchemist is a bit of a multicolor payoff for blue-black. Otherwise, there's Mortar Strider, a real weirdo. It is quite overcosted for a 1/1 that you're willing to chump block or sacrifice for some kind of synergy, but so not something that he's looking to pick up too urgently. So, taking a look at Gravedigger and Pilgrim's Eye, these enter the battlefield creatures are quite good for playing defense because you're not taking a risk by playing them. If your opponent removes them, it's rarely going to be a big issue for you. So, very good at blocking. They struggle on offense because they often come down too late to be relevant. And with Forbidden Alchemy in his deck, there's a good chance he's going to have to put a big creature in his graveyard early on. So having Gravedigger to win back one of his late game threats could be a good move. But Pilgrim's Eye is also just really efficient card. 3 mana 1/1 draw card flying is really good because there's basically no way to profitably interact with it. You can't afford to burn a removal spell on it. You can't block it. And it does represent a way to close out an incredibly slow game eventually. So Repository Scarp, a card that plays well with all of these enter the battlefield creatures that I think Felix is going to be pushing a little bit towards. Graveyard Recursion playing well with Forbidden Alchemy. A good use of it as well is if you've only got 1 or 2 counterspells in your deck, they can be really high impact in the late game, but you don't want to draw them early. So even if you've just got 1 in your deck, you can recur it with the Repository Scarp, which is often a lot better than just having 2 counterspells in your deck. So looking at Dutiful Attendant, another small creature with a enters or leaves trigger, which is looking like the angle that his deck wants to go down. Mardu Skullhunter is a decent card, but probably not the kind of effect that he's in the market for. So just picking up the Attendant here. If he can get 1 or 2 big finisher type creatures, he's got a lot of ways to recur them and ways to dig for them. So he would really love just 1 very high impact threat to set up his deck to close things out once he's stabilized. So Muse Drake, the kind of thing he's into, but it's at a very low rate. It's a very expensive card because it is positioned so well in the format. Otherwise, Recover, a bit redundant with his existing graveyard recursion, but this is a more efficient card. Basically gives him a small amount of card advantage and selection. And Guildgate, also a good option. As I said, you want to pick those up early. Good chance he's going to be playing white if it's coming around, as there's some good defensive white cards, ways to flicker creatures, that kind of thing. But he's picking up the Muse Drake, so really committing to this mechanical theme of expensive small creatures. And Evolving Wild's pretty tempting. So Flaming Fist Officer can play defense pretty well because it's a real Punisher card. You care about what creatures are dying in what order. So if you're blocking, you can threaten to beef it up pretty quickly. But yeah, the fixing, I think he's going to want to pick up pretty early. Looks like he's going to be considering an S-bar control kind of approach, so. And he can afford to play a few tap lands. The format's quite slow. He's got some good defensive tools. And checking out Eviscerate here, I don't think he's got any removal for resolved creatures yet. And there's a lot to be said for picking up the first copy of a spell when you have Repository Scarb. Otherwise, Saving Grasp is a real weirdo. It's a very slow way to reuse an enters the battlefield ability. And the Guildgate would be more support for playing white. He is getting past some white, but he's also getting past plenty of blue and black. Really good sign for his colors that there's no red or green cards being passed to him. And Daybreak Charger looks like an aggressive card. Actually plays defense pretty well if your opponent is just trying to attack with 2/2s and 3/3s. The Charger is often at risk of being locked out of offense by being blocked by a 1/1, but on defense that is not really a problem. And making a tough choice between the Guildgate and the Eviscerate. I think he's got to consider what white cards he is excited to play, because it's looking like he's pretty safe to lock into just blue-black. So just sticking with the two colors for now. I think if he sees a lower opportunity cost chance to pick up a white land or a white spell, he'll go for it. Oh, so he's got an on-color Guildgate or Crippling Fatigue. Fatigue is quite a potent spell. So it's a tough choice here. Also in contention, I think Stoic Builder is quite a powerful card if you can make it line up. A 3-mana 2/3 that functionally draws a card is a really good rate. It's just really hard to get a land into your graveyard by turn 3. Evolving Wilds is the easiest way to do it. There's a couple of 2-mana mill spells in green. But I think no matter what, his Dimir Guildgate will be good in his deck. If he is going to branch into a third color, then the Guildgate will make a big difference to his mana situation. So even if he was looking to add green to his deck, he'd want to prioritize the Guildgate over the Stoic Builder. But Stoic Builder may be a sign that the cards he'd want in green are going to be coming around. Otherwise, he's only got 2 black cards, but they're both cards he's pretty interested in. And he's happy to be able to flashback Forbidden Alchemy quite reliably. So, great start here. He's got a lot of cards that work well with Forbidden Alchemy. He's managed to settle into the speed and color combination that he wants to be. So I think something he is going to be prioritizing will be some way of closing the game out. He's got a lot of defense, a lot of card advantage. If he has just one big flyer or some kind of threat with a bit of momentum behind it, a hard to stop threat, then he's got ways to find it, ways to recur it, ways to defend himself. So this could be a good opportunity to play Maze's End if it comes up. Oh, and Moment of Craving coming back around is quite nice. That's a really powerful defensive removal spell. Ceruli Gatekeepers is a card that he would be interested in playing. I think that's one of the cards that would push him into white. But he's not in any rush. If he just continues getting past good on-color cards, he's got no reason to branch out. And I think maybe if he is going into a third color, it might just be decided by what kind of threat he can get to close out the game. So white's got a lot of flyers. Even a small one, he should be able to finish the game in time. And all the cards here, quite plausible. Evolving Wilds is alright fixing. He's pretty loaded up on tap lands for how far into the draft he is, but they're going to get a little bit harder to find as the game goes on. Whereas the Suspicious Shambler, not so good at closing out the game, but very good value for playing defense if his opponent is just attacking on the ground. And then Rhizome Lurcher looks like an odd choice for a control deck, but he's got the capability to make it really big. He's got the capability to recur it. He might have trouble with chump blockers, but otherwise it would be a good tool for him to close out the game. And then the last card, the Cycling Land, just something I rate highly in general. Especially if you're playing a 3 or more color deck, there's a lot of value in having a ton of lands so that you hit your land drops, it makes you more likely to not get color screwed. And he's agonizing over it, so he's got a lot that works with the Shambler. If he can self-mill it, he's got reasons to want blocking creatures, but Evolving Wilds is just a generally good card. And nice pickup with the Alchemist. And nothing too exciting for him in that pack. Another probably unwanted green card. So yeah, lots of removal for this cube especially. A lot of defensive tools, a lot of creatures that block well. I think hunting for some kind of finisher or way to leverage his defensive tools. And sometimes the answer to winning the long game doesn't have to be a threat of your own. If you load up on counter spells, you can lock out your opponent from getting an advantage in the longer game. And a Cogwork Librarian in this pack, I like it as an option here because nothing else in the pack is too appealing to him. I think I could see him playing the Ghoul Razor, maybe the Blanchwood Prowler, or an Evolving Wilds, but I don't think there's anything in this pack that he desperately needs, and Cogwork Librarian is a really nice card to have before going into the third pack. It's a little bit less useful in this cube because the power level is so flat. A lot of the utility in it is in being able to get the 2 strongest cards at the start of a pack. And we've got Driver of the Dead is pretty good. I like Exali's Diviner if he wants to go green. And Perilous Mer is pretty good utility on defense. He's got a way to sacrifice it, which is quite important. And yeah, Exali's Diviner, a 0-3 that draws a card, is something he's pretty interested in, and so is a 2-mana 1-4. So I could see him moving into green for this. And I could also see him moving into green for the Greater Sandworm. So talking about ways of closing the game out, the evasion on Greater Sandworm, very relevant in this cube. There's a ton of ways to make 1/1s to block with. And you can often make those 1/1s at such a good rate or recursively that you just lock your opponent out of attacking on the ground if they only have one big creature. So the difficulty chump blocking it is quite relevant. He's got enough removal that it's unlikely someone's going to be able to set up a double block on the Greater Sandworm. And with a way to recur it from the graveyard, he's also perfectly fine cycling it away, picking it back up later. So, got to have some consideration of whether he wants to lock into green. He's seen some green cards coming around. He doesn't have any specifically green fixing, but he's got the 2 Evolving Wilds. And Forbidden Alchemy also does a bit of a color fixing job for him. Because not only do these selection spells help you find the relevant lands, but they help you not draw your green spells when you don't have a green land. So, pulling Mental Journey to the front, that's another color fixing tool. And a reward for playing defense so hard. Tazim Royal Mage, another nice card. It's a ETB creature, which makes it good on defense, and if he's got a lot of recursion for his removal and counter spells and interactive spells, then he can line it up so that he's casting spells multiple times when they're good, and he can set it up so that he's got a suite of options in his graveyard, can make the right choice for the situation. Whereas Mental Journey plays better with the Sandworm. It helps him get to 7 lands. It helps him find green lands. And going with the Mental Journey, a card you usually want to cycle, so in some ways it's like another copy of a land. It's a real filler card, but quite good at being a filler card. And Mystical Teachings is a very efficient card, so an instant speed card advantage spell, something that is really good for playing on an empty board if your opponent is not cooperating with your counterspell. Unfortunately, he doesn't have too much he can find with it at the moment. He's got a small creature removal spell, but he'd like to, and a counterspell, but he'd like to have an instant that can remove a big creature. And Chris's signed Cerulean Gatekeepers. We saw this on camera last time, getting Chris across the line in the finals. And yeah, the Gatekeepers is incredibly good at playing defense. Gain 7 life is a ton. A 2/4 is impenetrable. And he likes both of them, so he's using the Librarian. So Teachings has a good split. He can get a counterspell, a small removal spell, or the Mental Journey to draw 3 if he's really just locking in for a long game. Opponent is not playing enough small creatures or aggro that he has to respond. So we have Rise of Extus is very expensive removal spell, but the card advantage of it is really good if you can set up a lesson to find. No signs of any lessons just yet. Ashen Ghoul is a weird card, works with Forbidden Alchemy and presents a bit of a threat in a long game. Lots of other options for him in that pack. And doesn't look like anything too remarkable here. There's a Cycling Land or the Grizzly Salvage, and he's got a bit of the graveyard stuff going on, so as long as he is playing heavy enough green to be able to cast it, the Grizzly Salvage is looking pretty good. Otherwise, a bit light on creatures to want the Undergrowth Scavenger. Not a great rate there. A lot of the other cards in there just not very impressive in his deck specifically. A bit too aggressive or tempo leaning. And Golden Hind, nice option here. There's not a lot of 2-mana creatures you want to play in a slow deck like this, so just something that gives you anything other than attacking and blocking utility for your turn 2 play is pretty good. A 2-drop that plays into a longer game. Sailor of Means is a similar situation, but he doesn't need the 1/4 so badly. His deck's already set up to block pretty well. It's good mana fixing if he wants to fix his colors. And I think doing a check of his mana curve, if he's light on 2-mana plays, then he'll want the Golden Hind just to fill out his curve, give him something to do. But it's a tough call. A 1/4 is a pretty serious blocker. But he might be a bit overloaded on defensive options here. He's already got a ton of really good defensive removal spells. And his card advantage spells are extremely expensive, so he wants the ramp quite badly. The danger is, if you push hard on cheap green spells, then you're kind of committing to green being one of your main colors. So we'll likely see... So he is going for the safer pick with the... Oh, changing his mind. So going with the Golden Hind here, committing to probably playing more forests than swamps. And looks like he's excited about the Shorekeeper. Shorekeeper is a card that's kind of surprising to play with sometimes, so it has a very appealing promise that it blocks to keep you alive, and then as the game goes on, you can trade it in for 3 more cards. it has a unusual awkwardness to it that it's only good on defense against specific creatures, and you sometimes don't need the cards that late in the game. But for how glacially slow Felix's deck is, and also with the counterspell setup, he has reason to be looking for instant speed ways to spend lots of mana if his opponent is not playing into a counterspell. So here he's got a removal spell versus another mana dork. And this time he's going for the removal spell. So this is a larger removal spell he can find with Mystical Teachings. So he's broadening the instance that he can find. Simic Guildgate is very relevant fixing. He wouldn't mind the Notion Rain here, but he's already got a decent concentration of that kind of stuff. And if he wants to play 3 colors without getting color screwed, he's got to pick up minimum 5 or 6 non-basic lands, but he's quite happy to go above that. And we see the 0-1 wall, so if there's a big ground creature he wants to block, it's pretty good at it, but it dies to a lot of things. It's not so good against small creatures. I think the Glowspore Shaman makes a lot of sense here as a consideration. It's just quite hard to cast. But a lot of the creatures that the wall is good against, there's some overlap with what the Glowspore Shaman is good against. So if your opponent's attacking with a 3-3 or a 4-3, then a 3-1 is a great blocker. And wow, he's wheeled 2 cards he was quite interested in from the last pack. So Diviner, also a good example of a 2-mana creature that he would want to play just because he doesn't have much going on at 2 mana. But the color fixing is just really high priority here. And nothing exciting here. Could see him playing Slash of Talons if he wants some faster defense. But he's just going to pick up the Guildgate in case there's a more exciting red card he can get. And the Pledge Mage, a surprisingly annoying blocker if you're trying to attack with 2/2s. But it's pretty hard for him to cast, and it's pretty redundant with a lot of the other creatures that he's got. So yeah, very well set up to defend against 2 and 3 mana creatures. He's got some card advantage, he's got some removal, he's got 1 big finisher. Oh, that is a great lesson, but he hasn't gone in on any learn cards just yet. And so there's another on-color Guildgate, quite potent removal spell. And the ability to sack something to go for -5/-5 on that, actually really relevant. He's got plenty of small creatures to sacrifice. And there's a lot of games where he has the card advantage. He doesn't mind 2-for-1ing himself to deal with something big. And looking at the Shadow Wayfinder, doing some consideration of how much he wants to self-mill. So he's got some flashback cards, he's got a bit of graveyard stuff going on. He's not all in on the graveyard, but Shadow Wayfinder is also just a really powerful card. These, as I keep saying, a 2-mana 1/1 draw card is really good at playing defense, very hard to answer or have it be bad. And the self-mill utility is relevant in his deck. And speaking of making use of the self-mill, Tilling Treefolk is, I think, a very powerful card for the cube, if you can make it work. So getting 2 lands in your graveyard by turn 3 is really, really difficult. I'm happy playing it just getting back 1 land, but even that is a bit of a hurdle to set up. So between Glowspore Shaman, Forbidden Alchemy, and Set Wayfinder, and 2 Evolving Wilds, he's got a good shot of setting it up in his deck. He cares about drawing the 5th, 6th, and 7th lands, so he doesn't mind playing it relatively late in the game when it's easier to have set it up by then. Wood Elves is pretty nice. Ghoulcaller's Accomplice I quite like here. And Commune is more of the self-mill thing, but it's a bit of a risky card to play. You need a high density of creatures, otherwise there's a risk that it doesn't get you any card, and then you're just down a card for your trouble. And Accomplice is a little bit redundant with the other flashback stuff he's going on. I quite like Scribe of the Mindful. The thing with these graveyard recursion effects is you put a lot of value in how much mana you have left over after you've recurred the card, because you'd like to cast it straight away. So what's important about Scribe is that it costs you 4 mana, but only 1 of that is spent on the crucial turn. So there's a lot of situations when you can recur an important spell, cast it straight away. So even though it's less efficient in terms of what you get per mana spent, it often lines up better than the Repository Scarb. And instants and sorceries are very easy to get in the graveyard, so you don't have to worry about having too much of that effect. Otherwise, Rewind would be a second counterspell, plays very well with all of his instant speed ways to spend mana. But is going for the Scribe. I like the way it fits into his deck. In some ways, it's like a sorcery with a creature type, which can be important with a lot of these self-mill type of effects. And pulling out Krosan Tusker and another Evolving Wilds. Oh, and Grey Merchant. Grey Merchant can be really good in his deck if he's got enough black mana symbols on his permanents. I think he might be a bit light on black to be able to play the Great Merchant. And Krosan Tusker is like the Sandworm, he just wants a couple of ways to try and finish the game. The Tusker, less good at actually ending things without a form of evasion, can get locked out by a lot of death touches or just recursive 1/1s. But he's looking to play a long enough game that he can just put all of his expensive creatures into play at the same time and work through blockers that way. And the fact that it is also an instant speed divination is quite relevant. Fixes his colors if he's got green. And looking like he's going to be base green-blue with a little bit of black. So otherwise, Evolving Wilds is alright fixing, but worse than a Guildgate. It would mainly be there to help out his Tilling Tree Folk. And the Shinra Reinforcements is also quite an efficient card. Plays defense extremely well, sets up his other cards, but his defense is pretty good. He's got a lot of 3 toughness creatures. He's got a little bit of game against bigger creatures with his counterspells and removal spells, but I think that's a bit more of a blind spot for him than the small creatures. So for that reason, I could see him going for Embrace Oblivion here. Cogwork Librarian coming back around a bit too late to be that useful. And Dawntreader Elk would be another example of a card just to give him something to do on turn 2. It's not a great ramp spell, but if he's low enough on 2-drops, I could see him going for it. And Scattered Thoughts is quite a good draw spell, sets up his graveyard stuff. It puts him in a little bit of danger of having too much drawn self-mill and running out of cards. So I think a good chance we see Evolving Wilds or Embrace Oblivion here. But a lot of pretty viable options for his deck here. Really getting paid off for being in the open lane. And going with the Whisper Agent here. So mostly this is just something to do with mana if you're holding up a counterspell and they're not cooperating. Oh, Town Greed is very powerful. I also like Remote Isle in his deck. He's got a lot of ways to draw extra cards, so he's liable to be getting flooded out. A lot of ways to draw extra lands. But yeah, Town Greeter is just another very powerful card. Well, and the Gatekeepers looks pretty good here. It is more of the same of what his deck's already doing, but there's a lot of value in removal spells that are more expensive. You often don't want to be casting a removal spell turn 2, so paying 2 extra mana to get some kind of upside is something you are pretty open to doing, and the extra 2/4 is a very relevant upside. And not much for him in this pack, just picking up the Cycling Land. So he's got 4 gates, but he's got quite a lot of card selection. So even with just 4 gates, I think his Gatekeepers are going to be online fairly often. And Copper Mer is kind of tempting, but Golgari Guildgate is also really something his deck needs. He's very high on playables, so he's got to be prioritizing lands pretty highly, as if he wants to add something like Copper Mer to his deck, he's got to cut a spell he would already be happy to play. And a nice pickup there. The Opal Lake Gatekeepers, also a consideration, but pretty redundant with how much his deck is already has that kind of effect. On another Cycling Land this late is pretty nice. The Hithlane Knots would add a bit of utility to his mystical teachings. It's quite different to his other instance, so there's times he'd want to tutor for it. But it's not something you want to play in a long game. More of a aggressive blue tempo kind of move to make. So we see he's got a ton of creatures that are really good at blocking in the early game. Good example of how in this cube attacking on the ground can be a bit of a slog. So he's got the cheap ground creatures locked up. He's got 2 finishers, which he's going to be quite mindful of during the games. He's going to save his recursion spells for those most likely. Try not to trade them off unnecessarily. And Ally Mer is some color fixing, but it's kind of not where he wants to be going because he's got a lot of other turn 3 plays. He's got a lot of other spells that produce extra mana by finding lands. So we're really agonizing over these 2. There's definitely arguments for all three of them. Alright, finally committed. I really like the Lonely Sandbar pick there. He's got plenty of playables. Sigiled Starfish is a very nice card. That's going to play really well in a long game. Well, Arcane Subtraction is... So, not a card for his deck, but I think one of the best lessons. One of the best learn cards, but he's pretty happy with Field Research. We'll see if it's going to make it into his deck. Commune with the Gods is on theme, but he might have too many instants and sorceries to play it. And just a bit of filler. So we'll flash the deck up on screen for you all to check out. Pretty standard Sultai control build. Very good against small creatures when playing defense. Gonna get some cheeky kills with Ashen Ghoul and the other 3 power creatures, but it's mainly going to be down to the 7 drops. And leaning on Eviscerate and Alchemist to deal with the larger creatures. So we have Felix on the left and Ben on the right. Looks like Ben's in a heavy black, some kind of value build. Ravenous Rats, a great card for attritioning your opponent's resources. If you're not trying to work your way through blockers, and that can often be a foolish task in this format, Ravenous Rats is one of the better turn 2 players. You just want some kind of resource generation, put your opponent at a bit of a abstract disadvantage. But we see Felix has drawn 2 card advantage spells and a cantrip creature. So he's quite ready to play this game. He's going to be taking 3 this turn because Ben can pump up the Malevolent Noble if he blocks, and Felix very unlikely to want to trade his Mana Dork for anything at this point. And it looks like Ben might be stuck on 2 lands. He's got plenty of cheap spells in hand, so not a problem for him. And going with the Doom Dissenter. And there's a lot of high toughness creatures that Felix could play here to mostly lock Ben out of attacking. But he's going to start off with a Pilgrim's Eye, keep developing his mana. With only taking 4 damage next turn, he's still not in a rush. He can go down to 12, and unless Ben's got a flyer, I think he's pretty safe. And Felix just generally well set up to play defense once he's got everything going. Oh, and Town Greeters is... Oh, yes, he's got the Ashen Ghoul. So, great mills here. He's got 2 cards that work from the graveyard. Town Greeters, probably quite happy to trade that off with the Rats. But it looks like Ben's just trying to hit his land drops here. And trying to keep the pressure up. So Felix is pretty happy to make the double block here. The Noble's going to get harder to block as the game progresses. And he's taking advantage of how the Rats and the Doom Dissenter are not very good at attacking. So Felix can just... He's got a removal spell he can save for if Ben plays something he needs to worry about. And the Tilling Tree Folk really nice here. He's got 2 lands to bring back. So the Cycling Land and the Evolving Wilds accomplishing the setup here. And now that Ben's got a bit more mana to work with, he can start putting the pressure on. He needs something that can attack into the 1/3, which is not guaranteed. And Liliana's Shade, good at attacking, bad against removal here. So Felix has got a good spread of tools. He's very likely to take out the Shade now, and then... But there is some consideration for... Maybe he can trick Ben into wasting mana on it. But it's quite tough as... Oh, but he's got the 7/5. The 6/5. So he's ready to start going on offense. The Shade, quite taxing for Ben to use. Felix knows Ben's got 5 spells in hand, so he's a bit loath to spend the mana on it. So Shade almost definitely getting in for at least one. I don't think Felix is willing to trade his ball for it, given that's one of his few big threats in the deck. But we might see him go with a block with the Tree Folk to waste Ben's mana, and then that unlocks the Ashen Ghoul. So next turn, Felix can bring back the 3/1. It's not going to be much help at attacking, but it does make a good block. It's practically free. And with the removal spell in Felix's hand, Ben can't commit too many resources to one creature. He can bring the Shade up to a 6/6, which will get it out of range of the -2/-4 effect. And Ben's pretty happy to cash in his Doom Dissenter. Just upgrade it to a 2/2, try and keep the pressure up. And Felix is just chilling. So Ben can bring the Shade up to a 7/7. If Felix blocks it with the Ashen Ghoul, he can force Ben to waste some mana, beefing it up, and then kill it with the removal spell regardless. But it looks like he's not going to get too greedy here. So, a guaranteed kill on the Centurion. Ben cannot save it with its own ability. And he's just going to keep the Shade out of the calculation for this turn. So, Shade can't attack this turn. Ben is willing to trade these off, but he's not making very fast progress, and the Ashen Ghoul, Felix is pretty happy for that to die. So this is where Ben really needs to deploy something a bit scary here. And some consideration about whether Fume Spitter is going to go after the Golden Hind. But it's a tough call. It can represent a lot of combat trick style utility, or in this case, he might just go for a block on the 6-5, sacrifice it before damage, keeps him ahead in the race. And I think leaning on Liliana's Shade to keep up as the game drags out. Oh, but we got the gain 7 life. Undoes all of the work that Ben's done so far, and it's going to lock out everything except the Shade. And looks like he'll probably be pulling back the Eviscerate. Oh, the Mystical Teachings, going deep. So we'll probably see Felix using the Teachings to get his counterspell next turn. So chump blocks with the Fume Spitter, cashes it in for the -1 counter. Too late to deal with the Golden Hind as it's been sacrificed to the Repository Scarb. And finally, the Shade is coming into its own. Ben's got the mana to pump it. It's his best attacker. And starting to work his way through Felix's creatures. And with the Clay Revenant, as long as Ben's willing to spend the mana, he can just chump block the 6-5 forever. So this is where the lack of evasion is hurting it. If that was the Worm, then it would just be getting in for huge chunks of damage every turn. But here it might be taking Felix a bit longer than he'd like. And with the Shade in play, if Felix doesn't have an answer to the Shade, he can't play forever. So kicking it off with a draw 3. Scribe is a nice pickup. But he's drawn 2 self-mill spells, which might be getting a little hairy. I think it's viable to play one of them if he's got a way to get the game over with. But he also drew the Shorekeeper, and drawing 3 cards might be something that he loses access to if he mills too much of his library. So Ben, very happy to cash that in. And giving Ben a pretty good attack with the Shade this turn. Next turn, he might be blocking with the Shorekeeper and sacrificing it before damage. So that represents another free chump block. But Felix is just keeping his life total high, feeding the Ashen Ghoul. This is a real slog. No one creature is really getting much traction here. But pretty soon, Felix is going to have his Greater Sandworm, and Sandworm is going to break through all of this. So I think he'd like to Teachings for the counterspell, but he wouldn't have enough mana to cast the counterspell afterwards. And 7 mana is just an awkward amount here. So Ben making Chump Box, killing the Ashen Ghoul. Oh yes, killing the Repository Scarb, much safer, so unlikely Felix is going to be able to recur the Ashen Ghoul another time. And while he has plenty of land, he also doesn't really need to draw another card out of his deck, so no need to cycle the Baron more. This is a little bit of what Felix had to be worried about, that his deck is a little bit slow at closing out the game. He's at a slight risk of decking himself if his opponent can stop his 2 big threats. And he's at a high life total, but if Ben can draw 2 removal spells, he's got the means to keep himself alive long enough. So, unlikely we'll see Felix going for another Chump Block here. He might just accept taking 6 damage. He can't afford to sacrifice the Shorekeeper yet. And he's got the Mystical Teachings to tutor through his deck, but he doesn't have a 2 mana instant that is going to be better than just fetching the counterspell here. Looking at going deep with the Forbidden Alchemy. But I think some consideration for if he picks up Moment of Craving, he can encourage Ben to tap out, finish off the Liliana's Shade, but Ben's not going to fall for it if he reveals the card first. A lot of consideration here. The Forbidden Alchemy is the stronger card, but it may be too late in the game for it to be useful. Oh, so he's just going to take out one of Ben's Chump Blockers. Try and speed the game along that way. Got the counterspell, very nice. So Ben probably going to go for a Chump Block and recur the Clay Revenant here. As tempting as it is to trade it off with the 3-1. So he's going to go for dealing with the Ashen Ghoul, going down to 6. Ben's mana getting taxed quite severely here. He wants to have mana for the Shade, needs to spend 4 mana on the Revenant, and also needs to play another blocker to avoid dying to the Boar next turn. And it looks like Felix, he's going to use his removal and interaction to just push through Ben's defenses. So he can recur Eviscerate to deal with one blocker. He's got a counterspell to deal with another blocker that Ben plays, so Ben would need to play 3 blockers here in order to survive the turn. And it's not going to be enough. Out of Air takes care of that. Festering Mummy very nearly keeping Ben alive, but... And that's game 1 to Felix. Got there in the end through endless chump blocking. So, no sign of a second color out of Ben, so he must be deep into mono black. And Felix making some considerations about his curve with the tap lands. You generally want to deploy them as early as possible to broaden your options later in the game. But for something like a Golden Hind, some cards are more urgent to cast than others. And Shorekeeper looking like unlikely to get much done for a long time. Not going to be able to block the Crusader if Ben has anything to sacrifice to it. Oh, and not the ideal mills. He would much rather be drawing that Eviscerate here. But he's got the full trio of Guild Gates. And Ben doesn't have something to sack, so the Shorekeeper manages to get a good block in. Ah, but he gets the raid trigger. And looks like no interest in drawing any more lands. That was a very useful amount of card filtering for Ben. And looks like Felix just passing with Counterspell and Forbidden Alchemy ready. Doesn't have a good block on either of Ben's creatures, unless he's willing to trade the Shorekeeper for the 2/2, which would actually be a pretty good trade, so Ben not going for the sacrifice there. And no good to counter that. Bonebinder Raider, quite good against counterspells. And would rather be spending the mana on Forbidden Alchemy. The Gatekeepers here looks really nice. Not going to block so well, except against the Orator. But otherwise, gaining 7 life is just a ton in this format. There are ways for small creatures to keep attacking through, but you can simply outpace them through life gain. Really, Felix's deck just playing defense against small creatures in so many different angles. It's lining up really well here. And some consideration to leaving the counterspell open. It's clear Ben was playing around it last turn, so he's probably got something that he wants to protect. Another nicely lined up Tilling Treefolk. And Felix can counter a creature spell here. So he's managed to keep up the counterspell. With all the lands he's drawn, it's unlikely he's going to be forced to tap out anytime soon, because as long as he's just hitting his land drops, he's got tons of life to work with. He's not in any hurry to really do anything here. So unlikely Ben is going to be able to force him to tap out. So I think Ben's going to have to just burn through this counterspell by playing something good into it. But that's only viable if Ben's got multiple good things to cast. Getting the one cheeky damage can matter in a long game. And I doubt he's blocking with the greeters unless Ben presents something a bit scarier. And here's the Gain 7 life. These gatekeepers have been overperforming. It's just so much life to gain against a deck full of 2/2s. And plenty of stuff to discard to that. So yeah, it does look like Ben's only got one relevant spell left in his hand. He's probably angling to top deck a second good spell so he can cast both in one turn. It does feel like Ben's... When you're in this situation, it can feel like you're wasting mana by not casting anything, but the fact is that your opponent is also wasting mana leaving up the counterspell. And with Ben's deck trending much lower in mana value, he's quite happy to sit there with the mana. He can spend it on the Bonebinder Raider. And by sacking off the Plunderer, quite likely he'll get it back this turn. Following turn, he gets some card selection to try and find a Liliana's Shade or some other big threat. But Felix also doesn't mind just sitting back. He's still hitting his land drops. He can flash back Faithless Loot, Forbidden Alchemy next turn. And as long as all Ben is presenting is 2/2s, Felix has got those covered. Ravenous Rats making a dent, but Felix has got plenty of fodder to discard. And Felix considering if he wants to tap a creature before combat. But at 21, he's not in any rush. He doesn't have to take a risk. Some consideration to countering this, but Ben's got so few relevant cards in his deck at this point. Felix can probably save the counterspell and a removal spell and just deal with everything that Ben owns that has more than 2 power, at which point his defenses are solidly keeping him alive. He can finish things off with the 6/5. But without the 2/4 in play, there is some onus on Felix to get a serious creature on the battlefield. Very unlikely he'll be casting the 6/5 this turn, as it would tap him out of the counterspell. So he's going to go looking for something else. Definitely a disappointing hit off that Forbidden Alchemy. And taking a risk here. So Ben's done some card filtering. If he's got the Liliana's Shade, he can resolve it here. And once that's in play, he might not need to cast another spell. Oh, but it's the Boulder. So Ben's unlocked a good attack. He's dealt with one of Felix's two major threats. But the trouble with this is there's quite a lot of cards in Felix's deck that match up well against Ben's board. So we'll probably see a Grizzly Salvage for a creature with 3 toughness, which will be a real headache for Ben. The Ubalsar Gatekeepers would be great here. But it looks like it's going to be sacrificing the Shorekeeper this turn. Trying to get every last card from his deck to avoid decking out. And his life total is still high enough. He doesn't have to be too stressed here. He takes 4, goes to 10. And there's the Greater Sandworm. Oh, and looks like he'll be able to play the Sandworm with Counterspell backup. Alternatively, he can tap out for the Scribe of the Mindful, be ready to recur a spell next turn. Or he can play the Scribe, play the removal spell. He only winds up taking 2 damage, and then next turn he's got the Scribe ready to recur something. And it looks like that was a bit of a consideration to whether he's more in danger of damage or decking. He can afford to wait another turn on the worm. So here he can take out the Centurion, tap one of the 2/2s, he takes 2 damage and goes to 8. It starts looking a little precarious for him, but with the Greater Sandworm in play, he'll be able to turn things around. Ben throwing up his hands at this one. And yeah, values the Scribe too much to be trading it off at this point. And Golden Hind, actually a pretty good draw here. Something low value that he can trade off for the Death Toucher. Lets him keep the counterspell up if he wants, but it would only be for creatures. So yeah, it looks like Felix is more concerned about Ben killing the worm. Because on board, if Ben sends everything, it's probably only for 3 damage, but likely just the Death Toucher. And Ben's got more value plays, but it's not really keeping up with the card advantage that Felix has presented so far. And now it's just kind of a calculus for Felix. If he can survive 3 more turns based on what Ben's got on board, he's going to win. He can counter 2 of Ben's spells, so Ben's not going to be able to contribute anything new to the board. So odds are Felix has got this one in the bag. The counterspell a very nice safety net. And he's got his third block already. So it would have to be a really terrible spell for Felix to be binning it at this point. And pretty happy with killing the Drainpipe Vermin here. He has to discard his Grizzly Salvage, which is no cost to him. There is a Corrupt in the cube that Ben would win if he resolves, but as a 6-mana sorcery, it's not going to line up for him. He would need to pair it with something else to force Felix to tap out. And looks like some consideration if he's just going to play into the counterspell. Ah, so an instant speed removal spell. Normally quite good against counterspells, but he's just not going to be able to get Felix to tap out. Once Felix hit 9 lands, he could counterspell, recur the counterspell, counter something else. So I think Ben was considering if Tendrils of Corruption and then a Corruption off the top would be enough to win. But with Scribe of the Mindful in play, he's not going to be able to break through. And forcing the issue here, Felix is going to demonstrate the power of counter spells in the late game, even with only one in his deck. That's all he needed to block off Ben's best card. And he takes match 1. What a display of absolute control. And now we're up against Gabriel. So 2 tap lands to start us off. These sacrifice lands, capable of some extreme plays in some cubes. And here we see an early landfall creature. Oh, but it's been counterspelled. That cost a lot of Gabriel's resources, so if that had resolved, it would be a pretty serious threat. Very likely to get up to a 5-4 or larger. But this already is really taking the wind out of Gabriel's sails. He's lost a threat that would have been a really serious problem for Felix. And now Felix has got the breathing room to play some card filtering and card advantage. And Gabe not preventing a clock just yet. Draws a land off of his 0-3. So with a slow start from both players, thanks to that counterspell, Gabe's got to settle in for a longer game, find some way to fight through Felix's wall of 2/4s and removal spells. And we see Felix picking the Grizzly Salvage over the Satyr Wayfinder as the 1/1 body as a blocker is too late to be relevant in this game, really. He'd just like the opportunity to pick up a creature, and here we see it rewarded, so Greater Sandworm. Very glad he did not mill that one. So Gabe's best shot here would be some kind of value creature that matches up well against Eviscerate. Chain together a couple of threats, try to get some damage in before the Greater Sandworm comes down. And hopefully have a removal spell for the Sandworm. He can't give Felix much time, or else Felix has got the 6 mana draw 3. And starting off with the Merfolk. So, a nice little value play here. Definitely does not need a defender creature here. And Felix turning on the full defense. Hasn't taken a single point of damage, up to 27. Gabe's going to have to fight over the long game with a big creature or some kind of unstoppable threat, but he's got to do it in the face of Eviscerate. He's powered through the counterspell, which is good. And there's definitely some threats in this cube that can play well against Eviscerate. Ways to recur creatures or otherwise fight a value game. And an awkward turn for Felix. He doesn't want to use a removal spell. Doesn't have 6 mana for the draw 3. But as long as the 2/4 is alive, he's doing alright. So it looks like Gabe's got Maelstrom Colossus, which is going to be really important here. Oh, and Water Trap Weaver, so he can get in an attack for 3 this turn. But it's quite anemic. He might want to be saving the Water Trap Weaver for the Greater Sandworm. In Abstract, I like his position in the defensive deck mirror, as he's got a bunch of mana acceleration, he's made some value plays, but he kind of needs to chain it into some kind of draw spell or really big value play, or just a creature that is going to play well against Eviscerate, which is pretty hard to come by, so the ideal would be something like Field Research. because Felix is so set up to defend against small creatures. If Gabriel can approach the matchup from a different angle, chain a bunch of card advantage into a big creature, then he just needs to work through the Eviscerate, the Counterspell, and ways to recur them. And there we see Pirate's Prize, so this is the kind of thing I'm talking about. Felix has got no way to interact with this. And if Gabe can just be not invested in attacking with cheap creatures, he's got 2 more draw spells. I like this a lot here. But Felix is doing much the same thing. It's a bit of an unintuitive thing to rate, so drawing 3 cards kind of twice as good as drawing 2 cards, because the first card is just replacing the spell that you cast. And now things are starting to get serious. So Gabe's got the Water Trap Weaver to buy him a turn. He's got card advantage that's going to serve him in generating resources. He's got 9 mana to work with, so we might be seeing the Maelstrom Colossus come down and see what it can do here. So that's 7. And let's go Cascading. If this hits a 4 mana card, it's going to be really nice. Oh, just a Sustainer. So Gabe is way ahead in raw resources. He's got a ton of mana. He's got some nice card draw setup. His Soul Read is going to be pretty useful if he can untap on a stable board. But Eviscerate is going to take out the Colossus this turn. If Gabe can stabilize the board a bit, I think he's got the tools to pull ahead. But he did have a bit of an unfortunate draw, not seeing the draw and ramp spells really early in the game. But Felix is actually offering up the trade here. So, an indication he might be saving the Eviscerate for something else, or angling to do something else with his mana this turn. And that is the case, so he's going to deploy the 6/5. He's pretty far ahead in the race, so he's not worried about Gabe attacking him. So he's got potentially 11 mana to work with. He can draw 4 extra cards. I'm not sure what Gabe's got left in his deck. The blue-green does suffer a bit playing from behind. So starting off with a Weaver, tapping something down. And now he's going for an all-out attack, so looks like he's going to be losing the 2-1 in order to push 10 damage. Oh, sorry, 12 damage. And then to follow it up, he's got the instant speed draw 2 and the counterspell. So he's pretty well insulated against Felix's next play. He's not going to be able to stop the Eviscerate if Felix goes for that first. But if Felix goes for anything particularly fancy, he can stop that with the Soul Read. But starting with a Eureka moment, so he gets to put a land into play. And with 4 mana left, he's still got the counterspell at the ready. But the trouble is, he can't stop the Greater Sandworm. So yeah, the Tuskar still tapped down from the Water Trap Weaver. He's got 1 turn to find an answer to the Greater Sandworm. In theory, the Colossus can block it, but Felix has got the Eviscerate ready, and he might just be firing it off now. Yeah, there it is. And he's got exactly enough to pay for the Soul Read. So, looks like Gabe's going to have to just cash in the Soul Read for cards now. Try and find something to block the worm or close the game out before he dies. But without the 7 power in play, his attacks are quite anemic, and he hasn't made much progress in the early game, because that 2-4 has just stonewalled him. So if he's got something left, he's got the mana to go digging for it. With 13 mana available here. So I'll start with the Vessel. Well, and that's a rough way to do it. So the Lucrocatar costs too much mana to Monstrous on this board. That's not going to be able to block the Sandworm. The evasion on the Sandworm, really relevant as always. But I think it's also a lot coming down to the threat-light nature of Gabe's deck. He doesn't have many creatures that can push through a 2-4, so by saving the Eviscerate for the 7-7, Felix has really stopped him from finishing off the game. and simply cannot block the Sandworm. So Felix managed to run him out of threats, couldn't interact with the Sandworm, and Felix takes the first game. So the Moment of Craving here, pretty nice if he can snipe a Mana Dork with it, because those are a lot of Gabe's best cards in this matchup. See, Gabe's got a pretty nice start with the Landfall Creature. That's also a huge pain for Felix, because Felix is well set up against small creatures, so if Gabe can grow that to a 4-3 or bigger, then Felix can't really block it. So, a good start here, getting some pressure on. But having that mana acceleration sniped means quite a lot. It meant that he couldn't cast the draw spell this turn. He'll need to get a couple more counters on the Scythe Cat in order to attack into the 3-1. Or Maximize Altitude is a pretty nice trick for getting past the blockers. But he's just going to trade it off, so 3 damage comes through. And Felix is back to just setup mode. He's got some breathing room. So, just some small value creatures, not in any hurry. Felix would love to hit a draw spell so that he can just set up for the Greater Sandworm. And good to have a enters the battlefield creature to bounce with the Merfolk here. So, can play Coiling Oracle this turn. Next turn, set up with the Merfolk, get more cards. Just play the resource generation game here. So, very nice hit. And both players just concerned with hitting their land drops, drawing extra cards, trying to find one of the 3 or 4 creatures in their deck that actually matter in this matchup. And looks like Felix has got a repository Scarb, but if he recurs the draw spell, he is actually a little color screwed. He doesn't have the double blue to cast it. And while he'd like to sacrifice the Dutiful Attendant, he can only bring back the Tilling Treefolk, which is not his number one priority. He'd love to be recurring the Greater Sandworm. So, a bit of an awkward spot here. He's not 100% maximizing his value, but he is playing some cards that are good in the matchup. And revealing the Ninja here would be quite a potent tool if Felix hadn't set up his blockers yet. Can recur the Merfolk and then loop that for more card draw, but the 3/3 Scarb is holding down the fort. So a great pickup here, a land that he can recur with the Tilling Treefolk. Oh, and something to fix his color problems. So Felix is on track to casting his Mental Journey, which is really nice. But depending how things are shaping up, he'll probably just want to slam down the Sandworm first. He knows that Gabe doesn't have many ways to deal with it. Oh, but he's got something big here. Ah, it's the Ivy Elemental. So 7 is a crucial number as it trades with the Greater Sandworm. And depending how things shake up, there's a very strange interaction Gabe can do here. A lot of people don't know that you can use ninjutsu to pick up a creature after it's dealt damage. So if he really needs to reset the Ivy Elemental to get it up to 8 counters, he can attack. If it's unblocked, he can pick it up with the ninja, and then he can recast it for a larger X value. 7 is as large as he needs it to be, but 8 would be a nice luxury. And for Felix, some consideration if he wants to go for the proactive play with the Worm or an Eviscerate. And against a deck with removal, the Eviscerate is more appealing as it buys you a ton of time. There's no risk of getting your big creature removed and losing tempo that way, but he hasn't seen much removal out of Gabe, so... So not much reason to fear it now, and he can happily cast the Eviscerate on a later turn when he can combine it with some other mana-efficient play. But this is a nice maximized altitude, so it's going to be able to set up his ninjutsu play. Recycle his Coiling Oracle, get 2 extra cards out of the deal. And yeah, Gabe, going on the offensive, happy to trade off his Ivy Elemental with the Greater Sandworm, as he's got to have some sense that with Black in Felix's deck, he's got a way to remove the Elemental. And yeah, Felix just chump blocking to gain 7 life. Gabe's got the ninja play, so he draws a card off the ninja. Then he can replay the Merfolk, bounce the Coiling Oracle, replay the Coiling Oracle, get another card that way. It's a nice value play. Oh, and he's got the Soul Read here, so just tracking through the mana spent this turn. He's got access to 5 mana. And if Felix doesn't play an untapped land here, then Soul Read can counter Eviscerate, which would be really nice. But he's going to start getting the value going. So can't replay the Coiling Oracle, but picks it up this turn. So he'll be taking 7 this turn, getting the Ivy Elemental eviscerated, and then he's got to play a bit of catch-up to deal with the Greater Sandworm or find some way to keep pace with it. And this is... So, in general, these small mana creatures, very high rate, they're very powerful compared to cards like Rampant Growth. They do expose you to these cheap, small creature removal spells that a ramp deck is otherwise quite well insulated against. We see, based on what Gabe has played this game, that the Ubulsar Gatekeepers would be basically useless if it weren't for all of the mana creatures. But the mana creatures are giving Gabe so much extra mana that he's just kind of priced into taking the risk, exposing himself to that kind of effect. And going digging some more, probably looking for the Maelstrom Colossus, which he has found. So he's going to be taking another 7 this turn. If he can set up a block with the Colossus, that's going to deal with the worm. But the trouble is, Felix has got some level of inevitability there. He can hold off the attack and just wait until he's got a way to recur the Eviscerate and deal with the Colossus, or he can wait until he gets the Alchemist and then bounce the Colossus. So, blocking not a very safe answer against a deck with all this removal. And sending in the 3-3 as well. Happy to trade that off for Gabe's 2-3 to just tidy up the board a little bit. Not too concerned with blocking the ninja, as he's already got 2 creatures that do that very well. So Gabe takes the chump block, goes down to 6. And I think Felix has got some consideration to trying to find his counterspell that would really help lock up the game. But he's just going to set up his ultimate defenses, back up to 22. So on the surface, Maelstrom Colossus is going to keep Gabe alive. He's just taking a big gamble about a removal spell. So 8 mana. See if he cascades into something to deal with the Sandworm. Oh, that's pretty nice. So that's got to be the best possible hit, maybe in the cube. Ruin Processor doesn't gain him any life, but a 7-8 is an excellent blocker here. The only thing that would give him some pause is that if he trades off the 7-7, then it means that he doesn't have much left to actually end the game. So Felix starting off with a Grizzly Salvage, seeing if there's a creature that can help his Sandworm break through. But the Tuskar's quite nice. Reasonable chance that Gabe has got enough blockers that he can just multi-block the Tuskar to take care of it if he loses his big creatures. It's tense. If Felix would need to assemble 2 removal spells, so pretty unlikely that he's got a way to kill Gabe this turn. But he's got the maximized altitude in his graveyard, so he can get in for 8 in the air. But Felix is still at such a high life total, he's not worried about getting punked out of the game. So he might be willing to just settle in, set up a turn where he fires off 2 removal spells in 1 turn, and steal the game from Gabe if he gets the opportunity. So a bit of math to see if the non-worm creatures can represent lethal. Gabe is down to 6. So this is going to be the Tusker this turn. So Felix doesn't have a removal spell. He's settling in for another turn, presenting another lethal threat. But odds are Gabe's going to get a chump block at the very least. And failed to find with the Evolving Wilds. Games are going long, decks are getting thin, too many cards are being drawn. So starting with a draw 2, it's a nice top deck. Oh, and the Weave is pretty good too. So that locks down the Sandworm for a turn. He doesn't have to worry about blocking it next turn. He's got ample chump blockers for the 6-5. So he can go a little aggro here. If he sends in the 7-7, he might be trading it with the Tuskar. He's happy to just send in both and commit to chump blocking the Tuskar if it comes back. So likely he'll be trading the Ruin Processor down for the Tusker if Felix wants to do that. But there's a chance that Felix just takes 14 and sets up for some kind of profitable attack on the way back. But I think, at the very least, he can afford to chump block one of them with the Tilling Tree Folk. So he knows Gabe doesn't have a trick, so he can take a big risk here. Gabe can only kill 2 of the creatures. And Ruin Processor is a high priority card, so Felix is pretty happy to get that off the battlefield. If it were earlier in the game, there'd be some consideration to getting rid of the Colossus, because if he's got a bounce spell, he'd rather not bounce the Colossus and let Gabe Cascade, but it's getting to the point where even a Cascade is losing some value. So Felix takes 7 from the Colossus, loses 2 of his creatures. Happy to keep the big creatures in play, as the small creatures are quite bad at attacking. And this is a good window for him to attack with the Tusker if he can afford it. But he's also not in too much of a rush. If he makes it to next turn, he unlocks the Sandworm. So starting off with a Mental Journey. Oh, and these are some nice pickups. So Scribe of the Mindful represents recurring a removal spell, taking out what looks to be Gabe's best remaining creature with the Maelstrom Colossus. And Felix is in no rush. His cards are going to get a lot better next turn. So, just a land. And Gabe's got the maximized velocity in the graveyard to get in for 8 points, but it's not going to be enough. Oh, he does have a last one up his sleeve. Ullmog's Crusher is nice. He might be able to power through this stored board through sheer volume of big creatures. Now, it's a little risky to send this in, as it would put him down to 1 creature capable of blocking the Sandworm, but depending how close he sees the game as being, he might just have to take the risk. So, taking a gamble here. He's got to start sending them in at some point, and with the Sandworm at least not able to block, he can cash in the Colossus for a double block or a chump block. Very unlikely that Felix is willing to go any lower with the maximized velocity in Gabe's graveyard. So trades the Colossus down for the 6/5. And if he can untap with the Ullmog's Crusher, it's a lot of value. So Ashen Ghoul finally makes its way out of the graveyard. And the Scribe picks up the Eviscerate, deals with the Crusher, Greater Sandworm gets in unblocked, and Felix is off to the finals. Up against Richard on the right here. So both players starting off with the tap land again. There aren't many 1-mana creatures in this cube, and I don't think there's any untapped non-basic lands, so very common for both players to start off with the tap land turn 1 and have a bit of a slow start unless they're really playing a tight monocolor based aggro deck. And Felix has just got a Grizzly Salvage ready here. So, doing setup, Richard playing a tap land. Looks like both players are pretty happy to skip the early game. And this is a tough Grizzly Salvage. The Pilgrim's Eye is a pretty good turn 3 play, but with Felix's deck kind of light on threats, he's loath to give up the 6/5, and especially losing the Counterspell. The Counterspell is a good tool for him to push through his Greater Sandworm, protect it from some kind of removal spell. Otherwise, he's kind of priced into just trying to get it done the hard way with an Ashen Ghoul and a bunch of removal spells, which there's a lot of ways to break that up. But this is very nice on the play. He's got the Tilling Tree Folk. So he's picked up a 3-for-1 here. And Richard's got something that can attack into the Tilling Tree Folk, but is quite vulnerable to all of Felix's blocking and small creature removal. And Exert, a mechanic that kind of helps you out in a really stalled board. So if there's no risk of getting attacked back, then there's very little downside to exerting. It often lets you trade up with the drawback of not being able to race if your opponent is dealing some damage back to you. So it's a very minor ability, but this is the kind of situation where it's going to come up. And Felix is settling in for a long game. No need to block the 2/3. He's still got plenty of life to work with. Brought back the Counterspell, so that gives him a lot of breathing room in terms of finding a way to close out the game and keep up with whatever Richard's long-term plans are. So sends in for 3, thanks to the Menace. But not putting much power on the board. On the surface, Felix can actually race the 2/3 perfectly fine. And cycling off the land. But he looks to be setting up the double block. So the Out of Air is ready to counter a creature spell, but not a removal spell. And Warlord's Fury changes the calculus a little bit. If Richard exerts, he's got a good attack. But with Felix having 5 power on board, Richard's got to be a little bit concerned about winning the race as well. So he is exerting, so that's a 4/3 first strike Menace, and not playing anything into the counter. So Richard's had a pretty creature-light draw. He's not going to have a creature to attack with next turn. He's not playing into the counter, so if Felix holds it up, he is probably winning the race. So at the very least, with what he's got on board, Richard's dead in 4 turns. he definitely can't make it up with just the scrapper. And looks like Felix is pretty committed to that plan, so holding up the full 4 mana, he can counter anything out of Richard. Oh, but this does buy Richard a fair bit of time. So he's trying to spend his mana on the end of Felix's turn to try and waste Felix's mana. And looks like he's just passing with no plays at all, so playing around the counterspell pretty heavily, giving up quite a lot of mana efficiency to do it. We'll see if he's got a blue instant speed draw spell. That'll play very well here. Not much in the way of instant speed threats in this cube. But also, if he can roll together some cheap spells, he can play multiple spells in one turn to force his way through the counterspell. And starting with the Welcomers, just helping Felix hit his land drops. He's got his color situation all sorted, and oh, so Richard still has some instants to be able to play around the counterspell with. Now he's kind of forcing Felix's hand because he's winning the race. Just passing the turn. Oh, but the flash threat changes things a lot. So, consideration to the Greater Sandworm. It's one of the best cards in Felix's deck in the long game, and the game has gone pretty long. The only consideration is, if he wants to keep holding up the counterspell, then he's not going to be able to cast it anytime soon. But he's not really in a rush to get any of his big threats down. He's got at least 3 mana to work with. Oh, and the Ceruli Gatekeepers, so the race is back in Felix's favor. And he's got the out of air for a creature. Not many non-creature cards that Richard could play that are really devastating here, so he's still safe against a lot of what could be going on. And he's finally leading out something. Furnace Strider is a very nice 5 mana threat. I think surprised if we don't see him counter this. And that's eaten up Richard's whole turn. Felix is kind of glad to have used up the counter. Now he can tap out for a Greater Sandworm or just start deploying his sorcery speed cards without feeling like he's missing out on anything. And Richard may be wasting too much time playing around the counterspell. He's fallen very far behind on the board. Red deck's not at their best catching up. Pyroceratops is pretty nice. Oh, and a removal spell for the Sandworm. I don't think Felix has any way to get back the Sandworm. If it was just in the graveyard, he could recur it. So, in terms of big threats, he's down to the 6/5. And if he can't deal with the Pyroceratops, then his small creatures aren't going to be able to get through. So it looks like he's thinking about following up with the 6/5. But starting with the Shadow Wayfinder, so if he finds a land, this is more efficient. And he's got 3 flashback spells for his trouble. So, big value there. It's going to be a while before Richard can make an attack onto this board. And makes a 2-2 with the adventure. Casts out the other side and content to just sit back. So Richard's got creatures to block the 6-5. Felix is going to need to line up some removal spells if he wants to break through this stall that seems to be developing. And opening himself up to getting 2 for 1 here. So Felix searches, likely for a Moment of Craving here. Quite happy to do this to keep his 6-5 alive. But it eats up a lot of mana and a lot of resources. And with the board getting stalled out, it's a bit ambiguous how valuable those 2 creatures were. In abstract, very useful cards, but here they're not going to be attacking anytime soon. Unlikely to trade for anything relevant. Oh, but Basilisk Gate. This is a beating on a stalled board. So Richard can, at sorcery speed, give one of his creatures +4/+4. Pushing Felix into a situation where he's probably either chump blocking or making some very unfavorable trades. And killing the creature doesn't accomplish much here. Richard can just move on to the next target. So, no exert. This is a 6-7 menace. It would cost 2 creatures for Felix to chump block, or he would have to put quite a large block into it if he wants to get it off the table. But that doesn't deal with the Basilisk Gate, which is what's causing the problem. So he is setting up a big block here. This is going to unlock the Ashen Ghoul, now that he's got all these creatures in his graveyard. And Richard's got 6 power, so he can kill all of the creatures except one of his choice. And plays out a 1-1. So he doesn't have a block on the 6-5. He's not urgently needing to block it. If Felix can set up a removal spell on the Pyroceratops, it's going to put him way ahead here. And that'll just take out the 1-1. But Richard's empty-handed. So he's very all-in, and Scribe of the Mindful does represent another removal spell. Richard's got 1 turn to deal with the Scribe or otherwise get ahead with the Pyroceratops. So Felix scribes back the removal spell, but Richard's just sending it in. So this is 8 power. Doesn't look like he's got a trick before damage. And double cleave or similar effect would only get Felix to 1, so doesn't have to worry about getting punked out by that. So, doing the math there, Felix takes game 1. Had to sacrifice a bit of his late game in order to gain control of the battlefield, but leveraged it quite well. And a classic all tap land start from both players. Nothing but playing lands and shuffling. You gotta be a little violent with the cards in Ben's cube to shuffle your library. Oh, and Basilisk Gate is a nice draw from Richard. That has got to be one of his best tools for getting through Felix's blockers. And back to the Kenra Scrapper. So Felix, on the draw, looks like he's got quite a bit of card advantage in his hand. He just needs to set up some kind of defense in the face of the gate to be able to deploy all of it. And Pyroceratops is really putting the heat on. Felix has only got 2 answers to the Pyroceratops. He can leave it for a turn or 2 as it takes some time to grow into a significant threat. But being on the draw with so many tap lands has really constrained his mana so far. So just starting off with the Tilling Tree Folk, still getting card advantage, hitting his land drops. He won't be dying to the Pyroceratops too quickly. It does take a couple of spells for it to really turn into anything. And he goes for the block, seeing if Richard has an instant. And he doesn't. And we see the importance of finding ways to fight through blockers in this cube. Pyroceratops and Firebrand Archer both ignoring Tilling Tree Folk in their own ways. Kenra Scrapper even managed to get a few attacks in the face of it. But that's a important eviscerate. Felix was bound to be doing that at some point in the game, so unless he's got a really pressing play, happy to do it here. But the Furnace Strider is in play. So Richard's sending in for 6. He's put a lot of pressure on. Felix is loath to jump block the Furnace Strider because he needs 2 creatures to block the Kenra Scrapper. But he's running out of time for setup cards. He's got to play some really big blockers or some interaction. And if he plays too passive, the Basilisk Gate is going to keep pushing in damage. Artful Takedown. He's milled one of his better removal spells. Oh, but he does get back the Eviscerate, so if he doesn't fall behind this turn, he can take out the Furnace Strider. He's got a block on the Scrapper and the Archer. It buys him a lot of time, and if he can if he can set up a few choice chump blocks, get down a Greater Sandworm or the 6-5, and then start pressuring Richard's life total, he can't wait too long because of the Basilisk Gate. We see here, even with only one other gate in play, if he beefs up the Kenra Scrapper to a 4-5, then Felix can't kill it with the double block. He'd be losing the Scarb for nothing. So, even at not its maximum power, it is representing a real headache for Felix here. So all of Richard's creatures have first strike. Oh, and Lightning Blast deals the last 5 points. So Firebrand Archer triggers, Kenra Scrapper is exerted. That's a minimum of 9 damage coming across. That's exciting, and we're off to the final game of the night. Richard on the draw, but he's got his 1-drop down. Good tempo against Felix's mostly tap lands mana base. But we'll see if a 1-mana 1-1 is going to convert into a meaningful amount of damage. And another more scary creature. G2 Amplifier threatens to do quite a lot of damage if you can chain a couple spells together. And here's one of them, so we're already up to 4 power on board. Oh, but he's got a Whisper Agent. So you can go for a free block on the Veteran, which is a pretty safe move. He'd be taking 3 from the Amplifier. But it's actually going to be pretty hard for Richard to push through damage with the Amplifier later. The 2 toughness makes it quite easy to trade with. And Pilgrim's Eye, good value. If he can trade off the Whisper Agent here, that'll be really nice. And looks like this is as good as it's going to get for the Amplifier. So Richard trading it off out of concern that it's not always going to get a 3-2 at minimum. If Felix has got a 2-4, or if Richard doesn't have a spell to cast, then it's not even going to be worth a card. So but it looks like Felix is missing his 5th land drop. His deck is quite mana hungry, so he had a double mulligan at the start of this match, unfortunately. He's got a removal spell that he really doesn't want to be using on this 2-2. And he's got a Golden Hind that is a little late. Not the end of the world. We'll see if he is committed enough to trade with the 2-2, but he would really like to get to 7 mana and deploy something more impactful on this board. Falconrat Celebrants is a very impactful card. A 4-4 is huge in this format. It's going to be tough for Felix to set up a board stall just because the game is quite small. There aren't enough creatures in play. He would love to draw his green Guildmage here. And it looks like he's passing with the counterspell up. Not his favorite option, but something that he's kind of priced into to look out for some kind of big play out of Richard. Oh, but he's got a he's got a removal spell here. Deals with the 4/4. So kills the 4/4, taps the 2/2 before it can attack. Richard just has a 3/3 to follow it up. If Felix can rip a 2/4, it's going to play really well here. Oh, but it's another 7 mana spell. He might not have time for it. And yeah, cycling off the Tuskar, so fetches a basic land and then draws a card. He's got to be just fishing for a good defensive creature to try and create a board stall, because Richard's creatures are quite overcosted and small, so he can set up a way to block them, make them not worth a card, and then make up for the card disadvantage he's had to take from the mulligans at the start of the game. And starting off with a land cycle. Or Richard just pushing in damage, doesn't even want to trade the 2/2. He sees how, if too many creatures get in play, the game can stall out. And we've seen Richard's also drawing to his Basilisk Gate. He's drawn it quite frequently based on the amount of card draw in his deck. He's quite happy to just keep cantripping and look for his Basilisk Gates if the game stalls out. Nice. So Felix does still control the blue permanent, so he gets to remove the token. And no discards from Richard off of the blood, so he's got some good spells in hand. Oh, and there's the Basilisk Gate. +4/+4. Richard's now got a 7/7 Vigilance. Felix was looking to get his 6/5 into play so that he can wall out the Unicorn. So he can't afford to chump block it just yet. But if he plays the 6/5 here, he'll need to double block to kill the Unicorn, which is not ideal. And then any creature that Richard draws becomes a threat. So Felix really needs to set up a defense for the Unicorn and then follow it up with some way of killing Richard before he grinds him out with the Basilisk Gate. This is where Felix's deck's ability to block and deal with small creatures is having trouble with the gate. So, trades in the Pilgrim's Eye, gets back his Artful Takedown. He doesn't have enough mana to kill the Unicorn this turn, so he might be chump blocking it this turn. But after that, if he can keep Richard's board clear, then the Basilisk Gate is not going to be enough. And Richard seems light enough on creatures that if Felix can line up his removal spells and counter spells in the right way, he can actually get rid of all of Richard's creatures. Oh, and Lightning Blast finishes the job. Congrats to Richard. Took down Felix in the finals. I was excited to see the Sultai control come together. And quite a lot of gates showing up in the matches. So, always a pleasure with the Unsleeved Cube. I hope you all enjoyed watching it, and I'll see you all next time.